Hello, welcome to today's session. Today we would be talking about the concept of agricultural systems. We would be discussing the various types of agricultural systems and Whittlesey's classification on agriculture. So let's start with what is basically an agricultural system. When we talk about any agricultural system, there are various components that we take into account, like the production, the livestock, the fertilizers, the input, the mechanization in the region, and so on. So we must first try to understand the inputs and productivity of agriculture before we start with classifying for agricultural systems. So there are various kinds of inputs that we require. We require labor, we require electricity, fuel. These are direct things that we require for production system. The indirect things required are seeds, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, machinery, and water. All these together interact to provide a production system. And we have outputs for animals, plants, and as outputs is waste products. Now, this production system, when we talk about productivity, there is two kinds of productivity. First is the partial productivity, and the next is the total productivity. Partial productivity is measured as the market value of final output that excludes the intermediate products. So we are not counting anything which is in between the production cycle. So we are counting only the final products that come up into the market. While for total productivity, we compare the inputs with the outputs. So that is what is the total productivity. So we have understood the very fundamentals of inputs that are required for any process and the outputs that are generated through a productivity channel. Now, there were various scientists and various geographers who gave different theories on agricultural systems. For example, Hahn classified based on pseudoclimates. So his main emphasis was climate. Then you have Jonassen, who worked on the territories of Europe. Baker worked on territories of North America. All of them tried to work on agricultural regionalization. Now they divided various regions across the world and across their countries to demarcate what kind of agriculture production is going on in which regions of the world. But what are the basis for classification? So Whittlesey gave a classification in 1936, which was further refined by Thomson and Freer in 62 and 65. So Thomson and Freer further refined this concept. The basic idea behind this concept was to devise a regional pattern which includes both physical and non-physical variables. So you have physical variables and you have non-physical variables. And for both physical and non-physical variables, they demarcated 5 basic criteria based on which you should define any agricultural setting. So the 5 basic criteria that were taken into account by Whittlesey are: first, the amount on the combination of crop and livestock. Then is the intensity of land use, trying to process and market the farm produce, the level of mechanization, the types of building associated. So these are the 5 basic factors that Whittlesey took into account before classifying the various agricultural regions. Now, based on these 5 factors, he gave 13 agricultural regions. So there were 13 agricultural systems or regions that were propounded based on these 5 criteria. So these 5 criteria are very important. The combination of crop and livestock, I repeat, its intensity of land use. Then you have the process and market of farm produce, the level of mechanization, and the associated buildings with agriculture. So now let's understand the various 13 types of agricultural systems that were propounded by Whittlesey in his classification. So he basically classified the system into 4 major and 13 minor categories. So here are the four major categories which are given in bold. So these are the 4 major categories that he used. So the first category is near ecological system that includes nomadic herding and shifting cultivation. We'll discuss all of these in detail with the coming section. Then you have the subsistence systems. Under subsistence systems, he talked about 5 basic varieties. First is rudimentary sedentary, then intensive subsistence with rice dominant, with rice as non-dominant. Then you have crop and livestock farming together, and finally Mediterranean agriculture. Under commercial systems, he talks about livestock ranching. Then you have commercial grain farming, commercial livestock and crop farming. You have commercial dairy, specialized horticulture, and finally under cash crop you have the plantation agriculture. So these were the 13 major types that were propounded by Whittlesey. Now we'll talk about each of these types in detail and understand what are the basics behind each of these agricultural systems and in which region what kind of agricultural system dominates. Besides these 13, we would be looking on to some other major types of agricultural systems. So let's start with the first kind of system today. So the first kind of system that we will be discussing today is subsistence farming. It's common mainly in the regions of Asia. So you have India as one of the common regions where you have subsistence farming. The subsistence farming is basically done on a small plot of land. So you have a small plot of land. On that, what you do is basically you work with self-sufficiency. So you grow that much that is sufficient for your own family. If there is extra, you sell it. If there is not, you don't. So it's kind of rudimentary tools that are used. Primitive methods of agriculture are used. There are no technological advancements. The quality of seeds are poor. Poor quality of livestock is used. It requires very less labor because it's used. They are growing just for their own family. So it's just the family members who are working on the farm. But the efficiency of labor is good because they need something for their own subsistence, so they try to produce more and more to satisfy their own demands. Okay, so that is what is subsistence farming. The next two types of farming we would be discussing today is intensive farming and extensive farming. As you can see here, extensive farming is done on huge patch of land. There is very small labor input. So within a huge farm, you will have just one farmhouse or one person who would be looking after the whole farm. So there is a lot of mechanization. Besides mechanization, the efficiency of labor is very, very high because they are working on a huge patch of land. But in these cases, the yield is comparatively low as compared to the intensive farming. Now let's look into intensive farming. You have high input of labor, fertilizers, and capital, which is in contrast to the extensive farming where you require a very low input of all these components. So intensive agriculture has high input of everything. Okay, kind of animals, a lot of animals are used. Food is basically affordable for all. Okay, they try to preserve land, mainly used in the Asian countries. The intensive agriculture is common in Asian countries. Extensive agriculture is common in countries like United States where you have a lot of land availability. Then the next is nomadic herding. Interesting phenomena mainly found in dry regions of the world. So you have the dry desert regions of Africa, Central Asia, Middle East. So that those are the regions where you find nomadic herding. What is basically nomadic herding is you try to domesticate animals. You try to domesticate animals and graze them. So you take them to open pastures. The people who follow nomadic herding are known as nomads. They do not have a kind of permanent residence. They move from one place to another place, and they or you can call them as wandering persons. Okay, so they move from one place to another place. They keep on grazing their animals. Whatever product they get from animals, they sell it into the market. So that is what is a kind of nomadic herding, kind of very conventional and traditional practices common in mainly the dry regions of the world. The next method we would be looking today is the shifting cultivation. Now, shifting cultivation is one of the most popular methods in ancient times, mainly in the countries, again, the Asian countries. So, what happened was in shifting cultivation, you used to shift plots. So, I grew a number of crops on plot 1. Okay, then what happened? The plot 1 lost its fertility. So I moved on to the next plot, then the third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And after I cultivated a series of crops in all these plots, I moved back to the first crop because by that time the fertility is regained. So the fertility of the soil is regained. So I can again use that land. The land is kept fallow for a long while. So it kind of destroys the natural resources. So that's one of the major drawbacks. And another drawback, it is a kind of inefficient technique because you are leaving so many lands fallow. So when you are cropping on plot 6, you are leaving plot 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5 and 4 and 5 fallow. That means you are not cropping anything on these 5 soils. So there is a kind of lot of wastage and inefficiency that crops up. Now there are few other types of agricultural patterns that we would be looking today is. First is rudimentary sedentary tillage. So rudimentary sedentary tillage is kind of advanced than shifting cultivation because in shifting cultivation what you are doing, you are moving the field. While in rudimentary sedentary you are moving the crop. So on the same patch of crop, you are first growing wheat, then you are growing pulses, then you are growing oil seeds. So basically you are shifting the crops on the same patch of land and you are not rotating the field itself. So rudimentary tillage is kind of intensive tilling and it's kind of improved farming method as compared to shifting cultivation. Now better than rudimentary is intensive subsistence. Intensive subsistence is growing for high population people. So you have high population density regions like the Doab region of India. So you have the Ganga Yamuna basin, then you have the regions of Philippines, Malaysia, mainly common in the monsoon lands. So under monsoon lands you have huge population. Now intensive subsistence is of two types, with paddy, that is paddy means rice, and without paddy. So intensive subsistence with paddy means rice is a dominant production there, and without paddy means the other dominant crops are wheat, soya bean, then you have barley. In both of these, with paddy or without paddy, bullocks and bullock carts are the main animals that are used along with buffaloes. So that is kind of intensive subsistence. Now there is a combination of these two. So the combination is known as kind of subsistence crop and livestock farming. So you have subsistence crop plus livestock farming. That means you are growing crops for your own needs, at the same time you are upbringing the livestock. So common in Eastern Europe, countries of Russia, Middle East, the crops that are grown are wheat, barley, rye. Lot of animals are reared in the same farms. It requires very low capital but a large labor because you are working on animals and crops at the same time. So it requires a large labor. Now we'll move on to another kind of system, that is a Mediterranean system found around the Mediterranean Sea. So all the region that is shaded is a kind of region that shows Mediterranean agriculture. Here winters are mild, so you have mild winters and dry summers. So summer there is no rainfall. Common in South Europe, as you can see, and North Africa. The major crops are olives, grapes, citrus fruits, then you have raisins, wine, and another common characteristics of this region is kind of winter rainfall. So you don't have rainfalls in summer. The next common method is livestock ranching. In livestock ranching, as you can see, it happens at a commercial scale. Okay, so you have a lot of poultries available here. What you are trying to do is you try to provide alfalfa grasses for them, or cloves, that is the major kind of grasses that are grown in these regions. These animals who are reared here can be used for trade or slaughter. The production in livestock ranching is low, okay, but they have huge ranches. So they are known as llanos in Venezuela, pampas in Uruguay. So these are the kind of livestock ranches. Then what is mixed farming? Mixed farming is crop plus livestock on a commercial level. So it's a bit different from subsistence. So it's similar to here, but this is for subsistence, that's to satisfy your local needs. But this is on a commercial scale. So there is high expenditure on machinery. Kind of mixed farming occurs common in Northwest Europe. Okay, also in United States of America. So you have huge number of animals which are reared for commercial purposes, and then again the farm produce is there for commercial purposes. Now these are some of the common types of agricultural systems we have discussed. There are further other agricultural systems that we would be discussing today. So those are kind of factory farming. So what is factory farming? Factory farming is raising livestock at a very high commercial scale. Okay, and the farm acts like a factory. Therefore, it's the name factory farming. So they are reared for meat, milk, eggs. These are the major reasons. The cost is low, so you have low monetary cost associated with factory farming. There is a standardization. Food safety levels need to be met, but there are a lot of prevalent health animal diseases and health issues in these regions. It increases pollution common in North America and West Europe. Factory farming is nowadays becoming a lot of controversial issues, mainly in the developed nations, because they believe they are being very inhumane to the animals out there. The next is horticulture. Horticulture is basically plant cultivation. So it's for seeds, tubers, or plant cuttings, like rows. So you try to grow trees and plants on an industrial scale, mainly used for landscaping. Then also used for fruits and grapes and winemaking industries. The next is the next is sericulture. Sericulture is basically rearing of silkworms. So what is basically done is you have a lot of mulberry trees that are grown out. Okay, on mulberry trees, Bomboxy mori is the silkworm, is the technical name for silkworm. So they are kind of reared. So you have the cocoons here. So these are the cocoons that are reared, and slowly and gradually silk filament is extracted from these cocoons by methods of twisting. Okay, and you finally get the raw silk. So that is another method common in the region we call the Silk Road to China. So this is also common in regions of South India. So that is another practice known as sericulture. Then you have some common practices. First of them is known as organic farming. Under organic farming, you do not use the NPK fertilizer, that is nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. What you use is basically biofertilizers. You prefer crop rotation. You use green manures or animal waste as a manure in soil. Then you also use biopest controls. You do not use pesticides. It's biological control of pests that you do in organic farming. The next is collective farming. Collective farming is common in regions of Soviet Union or USA, former USSR in 1930s. The basic aim here is the farm is jointly owned by a number of persons. In some cases, it is operated by state, owned and operated by states, and then the workers work on it as employees. They are known by various names. So it's known by kolkhoz or collective farm. Then at a state level, they are known as sovkhos, and then you have very small private kind of private plots. So that is what is collective farming. The next is plantation agriculture. So plantation agriculture was brought by mainly by Britishers into the countries of Asia and Southeast Asia, common in tropical and subtropical regions. The major crops are rubber, you have rubber plantation, tea plantation, oil plantation, palm oil. Then you have cotton seeds, you have copra and coffee. The commercial plantation was basically owned and operated by foreign ownership. So you have a foreign ownership over here. They have large estates of land. Okay. It is highly capitalized and highly centralized system. Sorry. The final method is commercial dairy farming. Under commercial dairy farming, what we are trying to understand is it's common in temperate regions. We already talked about livestock rearing and things like that. But in commercial dairy farming, it's mainly capital and labor intensive, and it's not for local use, but it's for kind of supply to a huge number of people. So it's basically you do not directly sell to the consumers. You sell to intermediaries who finally sell out to the consumers. So there is no direct interaction with consumers in commercial dairy farms. It's very common in Northeast United States of America. The recent problems with commercial dairy is decreasing revenues and increasing costs to maintain them. So there is economic unviability in the sectors of commercial dairy farming. So these were the various types of agricultural systems we have discussed today. In the next session, we will be talking about the problems of food security and more. So have a good day ahead and stay tuned for further lectures on agricultural geography.